Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to take a fascinating journey inside the massive, often invisible machinery that literally keeps society ticking. We're talking about healthcare. Now, we all interact with it at some point in our lives, right? But very few of us actually take a step back to look under the hood and really understand the architecture of how it all works together.
So, let's start off with what sounds like a pretty simple question, but it's actually surprisingly tough. What exactly is a healthcare system? I mean, we all know what doctors, nurses, and hospitals are, but grasping how the entire thing functions behind the scenes, how the policies, the funding, and the physical care all interlink, well, that takes a little more digging. And it is a truly incredible puzzle to piece together.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. Defining the system. 2. The Australian healthcare model. 3. Public versus private care. 4. Facing wicked problems. And 5. Governing the machine. We'll be moving from macro theories right down to micro realities. All right, Section 1. Defining the system and building that abstract framework. Because to understand the machine, we first need to define its most basic parts.
First things first, let's look at how the source material defines healthcare. It's described as the prevention, treatment, and management of illness, and the preservation of mental and physical well-being. What I really want you to take away from this is that healthcare isn't just about treating you when you're sick. That's actually a pretty common misconception. It's equally about proactively preserving your overall mental and physical well-being through a massive network of medical, nursing, and allied health professionals. It's an ongoing active process.
Right, now what about the word system? Well, a system is an organized collection of parts or subsystems that are highly integrated to accomplish an overall goal. And the absolute key phrase to remember here is highly integrated. Think of it like this. A pile of car parts just sitting on a garage floor is definitely not a system. Those are just independent pieces. But when you carefully integrate them specifically to achieve the goal of driving, now you've got a system. And this brilliantly illustrates the point. Just like interconnected gears turning in perfect unison, a high-functioning healthcare system needs to continually exchange feedback among its various parts. It has to do this to make sure all the different sectors stay closely aligned and completely focused on achieving the system's ultimate goal. If even one gear stops communicating or maybe spins at the wrong speed, the whole machine is going to start to grind. Moving right along to Section 2, the Australian healthcare model. Let's ground this theory in some tangible reality. I want you to think about a number for a second. 24.7 million. That's the population of Australia. Just try to wrap your head around the sheer scale of that. Managing the health, illness, and well-being of 24,700,000 completely distinct individuals is a staggering logistical challenge for any system to undertake. And to put that into perspective, Australia is the 6th largest country in the world by area. Delivering an ensemble of public and private services to a population spread across such a vast geography requires an unbelievably complex mix of organizations. We are talking about local, state, territory, and federal governments, plus the non-government sector, all working together to deliver diagnosis, treatment, rehab, and preventative care. And they have to do it everywhere, from the absolute densest cities all the way out to the most remote outback. Which brings us to Section 3, public versus private care, or what's known as the mixed model. Now, what's really interesting about this is how they actually pull it off on the ground. It all relies on a very clear division of labor. On one side, you have the public sector. This is federally funded under a system called Medicare, and it's based on the powerful principle of universal access. That means all citizens have equal access to doctors, medical tests, and public hospital treatment. Then, on the flip side, we have the private sector. This includes your private hospitals, specific medical practices, pharmacies, and allied health like dental and physiotherapy. It's essentially an intricate dance, and both the public universal access and those specialized private services are absolutely required to shoulder the enormous burden of national healthcare. But here's a highly practical and honestly kind of surprising fact from the source material that catches a lot of people off guard. Medicare actually does not cover ambulance services. It's a really vital detail that perfectly demonstrates exactly where the boundaries of public coverage lie. And it's exactly why understanding the rules of this mixed model is absolutely crucial for everyday citizens trying to navigate the system. All right, Section 4, facing wicked problems. Let's talk about the friction in the machine. You know, running a mixed model like this is far from smooth. In healthcare, experts are constantly wrestling with a fascinating academic concept known as wicked problems. A wicked problem is a complex issue where the solutions aren't simply right or wrong. Instead, they're just better or worse. and any attempt to solve them almost always leads to totally unforeseen consequences somewhere else. The hard truth is, in a massive healthcare system, perfect solutions just do not exist. Let's walk through the characteristics of these wicked problems because they are chaotic in the best possible way. First off, they are notoriously difficult to define. They're highly interdependent, multi-causal, and they actually involve changing human behavior, which makes them incredibly socially complex. On top of that, possible solutions vary wildly depending on who you ask and what their vested interests are. Think back to those gears we talked about earlier. When you change one single policy to fix a problem in a city hospital, you might inadvertently create a totally new constraint for a rural pharmacy. Today's brilliant solution is no guarantee of success tomorrow. The search for a fix literally never stops. So, the crucial point is, because of these wicked problems, we absolutely have to use what's called systems thinking. Systems thinking requires us to look at the whole picture. We have to analyze how all those intricate gears are connected and really understand the cascading effects of our decisions, rather than just zooming in on one isolated, independent part and hoping for the best. And that leads us perfectly into our final section, Section 5, Governing the Machine and Writing the Rules. So how exactly does a society even attempt to govern all these wicked problems? Well, the answer lies in policy and administration. In Australia, the Department of Health and Aged Care administers laws on behalf of its ministers, and they develop policy to actively solve problems. Think of them as the mechanics of the healthcare system. They're the ones constantly tweaking the machine, writing the rules, and doing their absolute best to keep everything functioning safely for the public, even while an endless array of wicked problems keeps throwing wrenches into the gears. Let's move to a timeline and see how this builds, because a massive system like this definitely doesn't emerge overnight. Way back in 1953, the National Health Act was passed, and that made vital provisions for pharmaceutical, sickness, and hospital benefits. Then, 2 decades later, in 1973, the Health Insurance Act was introduced. That's the one that underpins the modern Medicare foundations we rely on today. These pieces of legislation are essentially the historical blueprints that built the immense, complex structure we've been looking at today. Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought to leave you with. If solutions in healthcare are truly never simply right or wrong, how in the world will our massive, interconnected machine adapt to tomorrow's totally unforeseen challenges? Well, by applying systems thinking, we can finally start to see how those gears might need to shift to protect our collective well-being. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. I hope it gave you a whole new perspective on the invisible machinery all around us.